The reason underground homes can feel almost unnervingly cool in brutal summer heat is not magic, and it is definitely not some romantic fantasy from survivalist forums where everyone somehow owns a shovel, a rifle, and infinite free time. It is physics, and more specifically, it is thermal mass doing the quiet, patient work that air conditioners do with noise, compressors, and monthly bills that look like a personal insult. Above ground, your house is basically sitting in the middle of a daily war. The roof gets hammered by sunlight, the walls absorb radiant heat, the attic turns into a low-budget version of hell, and every hot gust of wind keeps feeding the problem. But go a few feet underground and the chaos starts to disappear. The temperature stops swinging wildly between blistering afternoons and cooler nights. The earth becomes a buffer, a giant blanket, and at the same time a heat battery so massive it makes your entire house look like a paper cup left on asphalt. That is the part most people miss. Underground homes stay cool because the ground changes temperature very, very slowly. It has enormous thermal mass, which means it can absorb heat without changing temperature quickly, and that one fact can mean the difference between sleeping through a blackout and lying awake in your own sweat wondering how civilization managed to collapse over something as dumb as indoor comfort. Here's the thing nobody tells you about heat. Air feels dramatic, but air is actually weak. It heats up fast, cools down fast, and throws tantrums all day long. Stone, soil, adobe, packed earth, concrete, those materials are different. They are dense. They are heavy. They do not care about your afternoon heat wave. To raise their temperature takes time and a huge amount of energy. That is what thermal mass means in plain language. A material with high thermal mass can soak up heat energy and release it later, slowly. So, when the midday sun turns the outside world into a frying pan, the soil surrounding an underground home does not instantly follow along. The deeper you go, the more stable that temperature becomes, because the daily heat pulse from the sun simply cannot penetrate very far. At the surface, conditions can swing like a lunatic, but a few feet down, the ground starts behaving like a giant temperature stabilizer, tracking more closely to the average annual temperature of the region, instead of the madness of a single afternoon. That is why root cellars worked before electricity, why caves feel cool, and why people across deserts, mountains, and war zones figured out long before modern HVAC that if you want to escape the sun, you stop fighting the atmosphere, and you start hiding inside the planet. And that leads to the first brutal survival truth. Cooling is not really about making cold. It is about slowing heat gain. Your body does not care whether the room is cooled by a compressor, a cave, wet cloth, or a thick earthen wall. It only cares whether it can dump heat into the environment fast enough to avoid overheating. Underground structures do this by attacking the problem at the source. They reduce solar gain almost to nothing because the earth above and around them blocks direct radiation. They cut exposure to hot wind. They limit outdoor temperature spikes. And then the thermal mass of the surrounding soil and heavy walls acts like a giant sponge for excess heat coming from people, appliances, and whatever sunlight sneaks in through openings. It is not that the underground home is producing coolness out of nowhere. It is that it is protected from rapid heating, and any heat that does enter gets diluted into an enormous reservoir of mass. Above-ground houses are like metal cups left in the sun. Underground homes are like dropping that same cup into a cold riverbank. One gets hijacked by the weather. The other is governed by the slow, stubborn temperature of the earth itself. Now, this does not mean every underground home is automatically comfortable, and this is where fantasy gets people killed. You cannot just dig a hole, call it a bunker, and expect physics to tuck you in at night. Thermal mass works best when it is paired with insulation and controlled ventilation. Because the ground is stable, yes, but your indoor air can still become humid, stale, or loaded with heat from cooking, bodies, and electronics. Think of thermal mass like a giant shield, not a miracle machine. It slows temperature change, but if you keep adding heat day after day with no way for that heat to leave, even a thick earth-sheltered structure will eventually warm up. This is why traditional underground or thick-walled desert structures often rely on nighttime ventilation. During the cooler night, they purge accumulated heat. During the day, they close up and let the mass coast. That cycle matters. The building stores coolth, which sounds like a fake word invented by an engineer who has not seen sunlight in months, but it is a useful concept. Coolth is just stored coolness, the inverse of stored heat. When your walls and floors have been kept cool, they absorb heat from the room during the day and slow the rise in air temperature. It is simple, elegant, and frankly humiliating for modern architecture that we forgot this and started building giant glass ovens instead. Another reason underground homes stay cooler is conduction works both ways. And underground, the earth can become a stable heat sink. Heat naturally moves from warmer areas to cooler ones. So if your indoor air and surfaces start warming up, some of that energy conducts into the surrounding ground and heavy structure. In an above-ground lightweight house, there is not much mass to absorb that heat, so indoor temperatures spike quickly. In an earth-sheltered home, the structure itself becomes part of the cooling strategy. The walls are not decorative barriers, they are active thermal buffers. Concrete, rammed earth, stone, and soil all help flatten the temperature curve. Not eliminate it, flatten it. That distinction matters because survival often comes down to reducing extremes instead of chasing perfection. A room that stays at 27 or 28 degrees Celsius during a blackout may not sound glamorous, but compared to an above-ground box reaching 38 or 40, it feels like luxury. More importantly, it can keep dehydration, heat exhaustion, and sleep deprivation from stacking into a real emergency. In collapse conditions, comfort is not soft. Comfort is operational capacity. If you sleep, think clearly, store water safely, and avoid heat stress, you get more days to solve the next problem before it solves you.